Great, thank you, gentlemen. So my name is Karl Fultz. I am a solutions architect with our cloud management business unit. That's the business unit that actually is responsible for vRealize Network Insight. Very quickly, I'm going to walk you through the typical use cases that we talk about with vRealize Network Insight when we go out and talk to customers, when we're just sort of articulating the value proposition for the product. First one, of course, is planning and even deployment of microsegmentation strategy. So we'll take a look at what's crossing our virtual distributed switches in the customer environment, and that is really meant to help them understand how much east-west traffic they have in their environment, also ensure or at least help them plan for security and compliance, sort of change that posture that they may have in their environment. Our second use case that we often talk about is 360-degree visibility. This is really where we look at over and underlay constructs, and we talk about those elements, those constructs, and show them to you in a path. So we take all of the different data sources and we bring those together for you in a single view or a number of views, sort of depending on how you want to slice and dice that info. And then the last thing that we talk about, arguably one of the most important aspects of the product, is allowing you to plan out your NSX deployment, go ahead and build it, and then manage it on a day-to-day basis. We're going to tell you what's going on in that NSX environment, what needs to be addressed, how you can make changes, those types of things. So this product really, when you look at it from that standpoint, it's the management plane for the NSX world, in addition to the other capabilities that I'll talk about briefly. Now, we are focusing heavily on what we consider to be day two, and planning microsegmentation begins to bleed a little bit into day two, but the second and third use cases are where I'll spend most of the time on here the next 15 or so minutes. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and launch directly into the demonstration. I'm going to go ahead and start with the microsegmentation planning part of the product, and I just kind of want to set the table a little bit with how we can take this information and drive day two operations. The first thing that we can see and that we always highlight for customers is the amount of east-west traffic that we're seeing in the environment. Again, this is traffic that is going across our distributed switches. And I think the most important thing that we can glean from this information is how much of this traffic is switched, how much of it's routed. If it's switched, this implies that we probably have a great strategy for software-defined networking already in place. But as we start to look at routed, this is where we can take a look and see what type of traffic, what flows are actually going out to physical parts of our environment, out to our routers, out to our layer 3 switches, coming back into the environment. So really, at this particular part of the product, this is about an efficiency proposition.
When you say routed, you mean leaving the NSX domain, or you mean routed within the NSX domain?
So it would be outside. So think of your scenario where you have a VM, a flow goes out to a router coming back into the environment. Could be a VM on the same host, could be another host in the environment.
And this does not require NSX for this to be used.
For this portion,
in this
yes.
scenario, we're using NSX, but this is completely independent of NSX.
That's a key point, thank you.
Yes, yep, that's a great point. And really what this is meant to do is help customers understand, hey, where would they most benefit from NSX in their environment, right? Whether we're talking about just from an infrastructure standpoint, or, hey, my firewall methodology today is I'm out at the perimeter and I want to bring that into the environment, okay? So that's really what this part of the product is focused on.
And it's a pre-assessment tool, it's free, you can download it and use it and get these reports, right? So this is something we are doing very actively with our customer base, because a lot of time it's like, I don't even know what's going on, so let me start off with getting visibility into that. And so this is a free tool, it's a pre-assessment as we call it. It's something that's available to all our customers. The requirement is that you are running the vSphere distributed switch.
Yes, that's correct. So on the left side of the screen, just very briefly, I could go through and look at different constructs in my environment. By default, we're going to segment our flows, and we can see here at the top, these are flows that we've collected over the last day from our VDSs in the environment. And I can hover over each one of these, and I'm shown how these different segments in my environment are communicating. What's my ingress, my egress, my bidirectional flows, who are they talking to? With this, I can very easily spot, right at a very high level, where I may be having inappropriate communications occurring, where I may be having lab environments talking to production, and so on. I can also get a very deep look at, within each segment, what types of services are present in that segment. So we can see here, just by looking at our port information, This is a web. There's quite a bit of web traffic occurring here. I can also see things like port 1521 to help me understand where I may have things like Oracle in the environment or 1434 for SQL and so on, so I can begin to glean application information as well. I can also see where they're communicating.
And where are you extracting this data from exactly?
So this information here is actually coming from a mixture of our ESX hosts and our distributed switch through vCenter.
And is there a performance impact to collecting this data?
Very, very minimal. So very typical of any kind of access into. So if you think in terms of like vRealize Operations Manager, any of our products that touch the vCenter, typical experience.
So these are all vCenter APIs, and
Yeah.
so again, not constrained just to our product. Other companies and products are using the same information.
Yeah. So and the assumption at this level is that right. I'll say it again. NSX isn't in the mix here. Okay. So these recommendations are all based on 4-tuple flow information that we see that's traversing our virtual distributed switches. And I think we've also got in each construct, I can see this across my entire system, or I can look at very specific flow data with session information beneath that for each construct in my environment. Okay? And I can go back 30 days and look at the flows across 30 days to build out my plan and manage the environment. And I think probably one of the coolest features of the product is we're going to look at your flow information and understand and watch where communication is occurring. Particularly, let's say we have multi-tier apps in the environment. I want to understand how they should be communicating. And I've got a least trust model in place. So we're making recommendations on where I want to open up firewalls in my environment to facilitate communication between these tiers. Okay? I can also, within the security group portion of the product, go ahead and export out these recommendations. So if I want to take that, roll that into NSX via the API, I can do that as well, based on what we've seen for flow data. Okay. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and show you some of the other aspects of the product. And this is starting to get into more of our day 2 side of the operations. Assumption here is NSX is installed. We've taken this information that we've gleaned from the micro-segmentation portion of the product. We've used it to implement NSX. And I want to use my natural language search in the product to go ahead and, oops, my bad, go ahead and look at security groups in the environment. So you can see here that, if it would cooperate with me, there we go, that I can go and see all of the security group information that I have in my environment based around what I've gleaned from my NSX managers, from the various portions of NSX that provide this info. So we looked at prod mid-tier earlier. Let's go ahead and take a look at what the security group looks like. And you'll see that we're presented with a firewall topology. So this is information that we've pulled out of our NSX environment. And why this is powerful is, if you're familiar with NSX, when we start to look at direct and indirect firewall rules and nesting and IP sets and all the things that go along with security groups, it sometimes can be a challenge to understand exactly where my different firewall rules are applied and how they're applied. So, and unfortunately we can't see this too well on the screen here in the room, but on the phone and in the recording we'll be able to see that there are different sort of pieces of this pie chart that give me information about how these firewall rules are applied to this particular security group. I can also see information on the number of VMs that are associated with the security group, my indirect and direct incoming and outgoing rules that are associated with this security group. So I can understand what parent group might be having an impact on my child group. If I want to look at things like what's going on in terms of a very specific firewall, we can see right here our actual rule, what's being applied, the services that are being allowed, as well as if I want to understand exactly what constructs are impacted by this firewall rule, that's available to me. And this is information, of course, that's coming out a mixture of vCenter and as well from NSX. Now, for the security and compliance and even just general change management from a day-to-day operations standpoint, we can also go back and look at what changes have occurred in the environment. Somebody's done something, it's caused an outage. I want to understand what that was that caused that outage. If I want to take it a bit further and understand who caused that outage, that's when I can weave in our Log Insight product and the integrations we have there. In this case, though, I'm shown configuration information as well as VM membership changes, IP set changes from an NSX perspective. So it gives me a great deal of visibility into exactly what's been configured and when it's been configured or changed. Some additional areas that I can show you from our natural language search, just to give you some examples. So I want to see all VMs by network rate. So this will produce for me a list of my VMs based on the amount of traffic that they are sending across the wire. Right? So I can get a quick look at where are the hotspots in my environment from a network perspective. I also want to see things like show me my VXLAN information, show me how that configuration is occurring. And we can see here, I'm looking at one of my VXLANs. We've named it Prod Web just to give you some sense of what it applies to. And I've got my full VXLAN topology. No one else gives you this level of visibility over NSX constructs. So right here, I can look at all of the entities that are currently leveraging this VXLAN. And not only that, I'm presented with compute level information, so I can glean details from there as well. Right? Because we recognize that obviously the network side of this doesn't exist in isolation. We need to also understand the compute side as well. And then if I want to go and understand what path is a VM taking, I can look at it. There's a couple of different ways. I'm going to show you the other way here in a second. But I can see my path information, my host information, and then I can see my physical VRFs. So we can see that my VXLAN under the hood is connecting out to an Arista switch that we're gathering information on. So that brings me really to one of probably the more exciting portions of the product, and that's really our path information. And what we like to show here really is VM to VM communication. And what's particularly powerful about this particular capability is I can now look at all of the constructs that are involved in a path between two VMs. So it's an incredibly powerful view of both my virtual and the physical constructs that are involved in my paths. So I can look at things like my compute layer. So for instance, in this case, my host information that this VM belongs to, information that we've pulled out of vCenter. I can look at very specific virtual machine information, including compute level details, network information, and so on. And as I move down through my path, I can understand what VLAN that's on. And in this case, I can also understand that I'm running in a physical environment on this side of the path. I'm using a UCS chassis, and that's where I'm getting a lot of my networking information out of. So I can see here that we've pulled information in from UCS. I can understand what my virtual switch info is. I can also look at my VNIC info and understand what that is. Even down to interface speed, my administrative status, different configurations. Out to, and this is where I was talking about earlier with the routing scenario that we saw back on the micro-segmentation page. I'm routing this path is going out to a physical environment before it comes back into NSX. And so here we have information on our Nexus 7K, our routing table, our routing interfaces. If we had problems in the route here, we would show that information. All the way into my Panorama environment. So I can see here my, not Panorama, but this is my Palo Alto router. So I've got my routing information here that I pulled from that device. And most importantly, and here's the really cool thing, how many of you have gone out either with your customers or yourself and tried to troubleshoot a firewall issue and you crawled through literally hundreds of thousands of firewall roles? All of us, right?
Maybe not hundreds of thousands, but yeah.
I work with some big customers sometimes, right? But you get the idea, or even tens, right? Trying to figure out where that firewall is stepping on the communication oftentimes can be a real challenge, particularly where we have a mixture of firewall products in the environment. What we will show you in our path information are firewall rules that are relevant to this particular path, right? So you can very quickly determine, hey, is this firewall rule really what we want? Is it what's stepping on our communication? Is it the one that's causing the problem? Or is it, do we need to lock it down a bit more, right? So that's all we're going to show you as we go through this path. And as we move through the path, I'm about to get the gong here, so I'm going fast. We can get up into our edge environment. And this is where we get into NSX. We're going to show you our VXLAN info. We're going to show you our VTEPs. We're going to also show you where there are problems in our configuration. So you can see here we have our logical distributed router, or distributed logical router, depending on which way you want to say it. And we have a routing problem. It's being caused by an OSPF area ID misconfiguration. And we also have recommendations to go ahead and fix that particular issue based on best practices that we've provided out to our customers. And as we continue to move through the path, we can glean further details on our NSX environment that we've pulled in, as well as direct firewall rules that have been applied either from Panorama or from our distributed firewall, specific to when it reaches that particular VM in the path. Additionally, you can see where we have path port metrics and any potential flow issues that might be present in the path. So to wrap things up, I'm going to go ahead and then switch over to the NSX Manager portion. And this is really, as you may recall, I talked about where we can use this information to help you build out and maintain your NSX environment. We've got a list of 78 checks that we run against an NSX environment to determine its health, to make recommendations on configurations, et cetera.
Those are just pre-built best practices.
Just pre-built, yeah, exactly. And we've actually got a list of over 100 events that we'll look at, but these are the ones that we feel are the most relevant and critical to a smoothly running NSX environment. But we can see here we have our topology view, we have our NSX Manager. I can click into any one of these and be presented with filtered information on changes and problems for this particular NSX construct, and I can continue to do so. Right? So our goal here is giving you maximum visibility of your NSX topology to help you pinpoint exactly where the problems are, get up and running faster, right? And then maintain your environment much more efficiently. And we can see here that as we look at our checklist rules, it's pretty typical stuff that you can think of, right? Where are there routing problems? Are there backups configured? Is HA enabled? Are any of our modules that go on our ESXi hosts not running? Things like that. All things that could cause potential issues in your environment. But I think more importantly, we're also showing you exactly which ones have failed. I can click into that and tell you more info on that. But then also I want to know, hey, what parts of my environment are being impacted by these configuration problems or just general problems I'm seeing in my environment. I can dig in and get that information at a very granular level if I want to do that as well. And we'll provide recommendations on how to fix many of those problems directly out of the product. So I think I'm about out of time. I'll open it up for questions. But in a nutshell, this is sort of the nickel tour, and if any of you would like to have a deeper dive of VRNI at any time, we can get my contact info, and I'm happy to spend more time with you.
You can't run it on a Raspberry Pi, right?
Not yet.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a bunch of questions, but I think this the VR Network Insight Manager probably needs its own stage. It's a product in itself. It's a lot there.
There's a lot there.
Yep.
It's great though. It's
Yeah,
great.
it is.
It's a huge step. I mean, it's
And it's we're on an agile development model, so we're adding frequently, right?
Constantly.
Yeah,
that's cool.
to the product.
So I know it came up yesterday. Part of the big thing we always come back to is how do you troubleshoot it? Everything's great when you put it in and it's working, but when it's not, how do you troubleshoot? And I think you mentioned you can look at rules that might be not exactly what you were planning and things
Exactly,
like that.
exactly.
And I think that's kind of where a lot of people would see some pretty big value right off the bat.
Right, because we're taking our domain expertise, putting it in the product, and telling you, these are the things that our customers commonly run into, helping them keep their environment up and running.
Or even more than that. Yeah, you had the routing issue you just showed us before.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, there's no digging for it. There you go.
Yep. Right.
And what's the discovery approach for things that are not already inside of NSX or something like SNMP or?
Right. So it depends on the product, right? So things like CDP and LLDP depend also with the product. Like some products we have knowledge of the API, or we just make CLI commands. SNMP is another one that we'll get.
And it can go in and ingest an entire network's ecosystem, not just the virtual machine, so you can start to analyze all that.
Exactly. And that's, so if you look at our support list, it's a pretty comprehensive set of products, and it's something that we're talking with other networking vendors all the time to expand that out. But it's, as you would expect, all of it is is there's a process that we need to go through to make sure that we're getting the right information out of their products. And everybody's just a little different.
How is this licensed with NSX and everything else?
So today it's on a one-to-one basis for NSX. So when CPU of NSX entitles you to that, you do have to purchase it separately though, and you do have to own NSX.
So it's a separate software cost that's licensed the same as NSX, okay.
Yep.